Hello students, welcome to Veranda IAS. From the current affairs of environment, in this section we will be learning about Adaptation Gap Report of 2020. The learning objectives of this particular session will be to discuss the highlights of the Adaptation Gap Report 2020. Then we will move on and examine the Adaptation Gap Report 2020 in news, and then further we will explain the global challenges. And then we will also list some of the Indian initiatives to fight the climate change. Now, let's first begin by knowing or understanding some of the highlights of the report. But before we move ahead, now you need to remember that this adaptation report report 2020 is released by United Nations Environment Program. So that is the important thing for the prelims examination. Again, I will repeat the point because this is important. The Adaptation Report 2020 is released by United Nations Environment Program. So what is it? Let's first see the highlight and then try to understand the significance of it or what it is all about. The current cost for these countries is in the range of US $70 billion, that is around 5 lakh crore, and may rise to US 140 to 300 billion dollars in 2030 and US 280 to 500 billion dollars in 2050. Now, what is this about? So, this is about adaptation to the climate change. Very important. Understand, adaptation to climate change effects. Okay, let me repeat it again. So just see, this is the amount, like, okay, $70 billion is this current cost to deal with the climatic change effects and all those things, whatever happening because of climate change. It may include, like, if there is a flash flood and which is outcome of a climate change, or if there is an air quality deterioration and if you have to deal with that, then in these cases you have to spend certain amount of money. Now that amount of money that you have to spend at present in Indian terms, if you have to say, it is around rupees 5.1 lakh crore. Okay, that is a huge amount, and in terms of US dollar, it is around $70 billion. So that is the current cost. Now, what is this report saying? That to deal with all the climate change effects and all those things, what you will be requiring in the times to come, you will require 140 to 300 billion dollars by 2030. So see the cost that is increasing, and why the cost is significant, we will come to that. And by 2050, it is around US 280 to 500 billion dollars that will be required to deal with the or adapt simply. And adaptation is again relating to dealing with the climate change effects only. So adaptation of climate change effects. So you have to require that amount of money. Now, why it is significant? Because if this amount of money is required for the adaptation of climate change effect, then the poor countries will be suffering a lot. Remember that. Right, in poor countries they will be suffering a lot if this cost is increasing, because again we know these countries will not have the resources. Okay, and if they are not having resources, then obviously they are going to get impacted. So further, now what is included in the adaptation cost? Now the adaptation cost includes costs of planning, preparing for, facilitating and implementing adaptation measures. Like we all know, in Delhi we have a smog tower, right? We have a smog tower. Let's take this example, and through that example, let's try to understand what is the adaptation cost. Now, why do we require a smog tower? Because the air quality is very, what you can say, not very good. Fine, if it is not good, then why it is not good? What can be the reasons? So there are two major reasons that we can say. One is the burning of, what you can say, the agriculture issue. They burn the crop residue. So in agriculture, crop residue is burnt. Fine. So now with the agriculture crop residue and all those things, that is one reason. Next is, we can say, it is the cars and vehicles specifically. I will just simply say cars or the other vehicles. Now they emit the emission, and because of that the air quality is not good. Now when we are talking about crop residue and all those things, so are these going things going to exist? Yes, they are going to exist. Now, what you have to do, the government has to spend certain amount of money to subsidize or to look into the efforts that this crop residue will not be burned by the farmers. So that cost has to be incurred. For example, if new technology has to be brought on, again, if it is very costly, then first of all, government, the people, farmers will not accept it. So let's say it is some X cost required to incentivize that the farmers are not burning the crop residue, and because of that the air quality can be at least at certain levels. Now for cars and vehicle, what government has done, like they have these measures like CNG, okay, or what do we have, BS6 Bharat stage norms and all those things. So if these are there, what is happening, the cost, and they here BS6, the cost of crop residue, this is the cost that has to be added upon. So this is for what, this is actually the adaptation cost, understanding. So here whenever this, and then we have to also create the smog tower, because still what we are finding that okay, in spite of these efforts the air quality is not good, so smog tower is also going to cost. So simply the air pollution itself, which is again, we cannot only say that it is a climate change effect, but yes, it is included into what we can say the adaptation cost. So that smog tower, creating it, giving farmers the incentives, then looking into the vehicles issues and all those things, these are all what, these are adaptation costs. So this adaptation cost basically includes cost of planning, like if you have to plan certain things, like okay, like for example water pollution is there, and because of water pollution environmental changes can happen. So if you have to deal with or clean the river, then again you have to spend certain amount of money. So it's about that planning and preparing for, so whatever you actually plan for, when you have to prepare for it, like if you have to create certain mechanism, if you have to create certain instrument, if you have to create certain kind of technology, then obviously you are preparing for facilitating and implementing adaptation measures. So all these measures, or whatever the money is required for that, that is called as an adaptation cost, understanding. So adaptation cost is the cost that is required to deal with the climate change effects. Okay. Now, developing countries, particularly in Africa and Asia, will be hardest hit by the climate change, since they are at least prepared to deal with it. Why? Because see, now when we talk about countries in Africa and Asia, there is a government over there, right? If there is a government, and this government has two priorities. One, it has a developmental agenda, and then it has to also, if it has to also deal with the environment. Now when we deal with the environment, what they have to do, they have to take some stringent measures, just like that crop residue thing in India. Now where will government spend the money, because already it has a limited amount of money. So if it has to spend a significant amount of money only on the environment, then what it will spend on the development. So development versus environment debate is most significant in these countries, specifically the developing countries and the poor countries, because they have limited resources. But if these costs are increasing in the times to come, which is said by the United Nations Environment Program, then what is the thing? What we are finding? We are finding that it will be these countries will be hardest hit, because they will not be able to mitigate the effects. Like for example, a disaster happened, like there is a rising sea levels, and if the coastal areas of those particular countries, poor countries, let's take an example for Fiji, even if the coastal areas are getting submerged under the water, how they will deal with it? Or even it can be a country like Maldives, okay, which is known for the tourist places and all those things. But global climate change effect and the rising sea levels are seen over there also. So how these countries will be able to deal with those pressures? Okay, so in that case, point is that out of these reports, what inference we can bring out is that developing countries will be suffering a lot, and because of that only, the responsibility of the developed world, and again the responsibility, historical responsibility that they have to take, because these effects, they have benefited most out of this pollution. Okay, the industrial revolution or the 20th century revolutions that happened, they did the pollutions and all those things, but the sufferings of the climate change are not limited to a particular region or particular area. The climate or the nature does not distinguish, does not know who has done which kind of thing. Okay, so it is going to impact each and everyone. And specifically, if the developed worlds are having a lot amount of money and resources, so they have to spend for the poor countries also, and that has been the core of discussion when it comes to the climate change conferences also. So I hope you have understood the highlights of this particular report. Now let's move on to study what actually was in news. So obviously it was in news, so we are studying in current affairs. So as I told you, in January 2021, United Nations Environment Program has released the United Nations Adaptation Gap Report 2020. This is what we started with, so nothing new as such. Since the first edition in 2014, the UNEP has overseen the preparation of United Nations Environment's Adaptation Gap Report series. Got it? So this is again important and significant from the prelims point of view. Remember that prelims, it is very, very important. Wow, many a times, every year almost, they are asking a question where they will give you the name of the report and they will ask you which organization has created it. So the first level, it is created by the United Nations Environment Program. Keep that in mind, fixed in mind. You have like a very probable 2-marker with you. Then, since the first edition in 2014, so it was released first in 2014, that is the second factual information that you have to remember for the prelims. UNEP has overseen the preparation of United Nations Environment Adaptation Gap Report series. So that is 2 points from this particular slide you have to remember. And then they can ask you a inference based point, which was nothing but this one, that who will be suffering most. So the developing countries will be suffering because the cost of adaptation will be increasing in the times to come. Then further, there is one point, the report purpose is to help national and international efforts to adapt to climate change. Yes, we have to accept at one level, yes, fine, we are doing a lot of things to deal with the climate change. At the same time, we have to do the measures or take the measures to adapt with the climate change also. So, to help national and international efforts to adapt to the climate change. So, that is one very important point what that is there in the news regarding this particular report. So I hope you have understood this thing also. Now further on, what are the global challenges basically? We will just have an overview of these global challenges. Now first is obviously the rise in temperature, right? Now according to current Paris Agreement pledges, the world will see at least 3 degrees Celsius temperature rise this century. Now this is 3 degrees Celsius overall if in a century if it is increasing. That is very rapid in pace. Now see, the temperatures on the planet has been increasing since the times immemorial. Like they always, we have from ice age till today's time, temperature is increasing. But the pace at which it is increasing, it does not allow the scope, or it does not give a scope to the other organisms or other ecosystem to evolve in that way. Okay, so if it is happening rapidly, the ecosystem is getting damaged. So if 3 degrees Celsius temperature rise is there in this century, even if we keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius or even 1.5 degrees Celsius, poor countries will suffer. Like for example, how they will suffer? Rise in temperature helps the mosquito responsible for the malaria. There will be significant increase in the mosquitoes that lead to malaria. Now malaria is a big, very significant epidemic in the African region. Or even in India, we find that malaria still is prevalent. So if the mosquitoes are increasing, because it will be favorable for them, and then what will happen? Malaria increases. So people's mortality again will increase. So this is where the mitigation or the adaptation things comes. Right? A single temperature increase will result into this thing. Then for another thing, if there is a rise in temperature, then the wheat that is grown, the productivity of the wheat decreases. Now, if the productivity of the wheat decreases overall across the world, and if we have not done technological changes or we have not created genetically modified wheat crops and all those things, then how we are going to answer the food security? Right? If the rise in temperature is there, the global weather patterns are going to change. So, in those contexts, at least 3 degrees Celsius temperature rise this century, even if we keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius or even 1.5 degrees Celsius, poor countries will suffer. Okay, they don't have the resources to deal with it. Then the COVID-19 epidemic has had an impact on adaptation attempts, although the magnitude of that impact has yet to be determined. Now, exactly people will be learnings and all those things. Now, COVID-19 epidemic has had an impact on adaptation attempts, although the magnitude of that impact has yet to be determined. So, point is, pandemics are increasing. Like we are having a global pandemic, which we didn't have. Okay, in the earlier times. Now there are multiple reasons for that. Like when the plague pandemic was happening, epidemic and pandemics were happening in India or in other part in the 20th centuries. The point was that people were also not traveling that much. The communication and the transportation was not that fast. But today's age, what is happening? Like one day we are here and another day we can be in the other country. So that is one of the reasons. But is pandemic related to the climate change, or is the rate at which the transmission of this virus is happening and new strains are coming every now and then? So is it somehow related to the climate change or climate change phenomena? Will there be new kind of species in the times to come? Now, who believed that there can be a new kind of virus which was not known to the world, like through 2 years down the lane? Like it started when we became aware, we became something around December 2019, we became aware, and by the March it had reached India, and by that time it has crossed all the barriers. Like it went to Africa, it went to Europe, it went to America, Australia, every part of the world. Even that is same thing is happening with the Omicron variant also. So pandemic and how these things are related. So what will be the impact? First of all, point is pandemic, how much it is responsible for the COVID, okay, climate change as responsible for the pandemic. And then obviously in this pandemic period, we cannot concentrate much more on the COVID, on the climate change effects and all those things, because the priority has been shifted. So that is another point. Now, what are the India's initiatives to fight climate change? Just like earlier I told you, we gave the example of smog tower, and then you have to crop residue should not be burned. We implemented BS6 and all those things. So these are just temporary, or we can say kind of measures that are done and every now and then. But some concrete programs are also there. So if a question comes in the mains examination about India's initiatives to fight the climate change, then you have this as an answer. So what is it? National Clean Air Program. Now, it is 5-year action plan with a rough objective of 20-30% decrease in particulate matter 10 and particulate matter 2.5 concentrations by 2024 using 2017 as the baseline. Now, how you can do that? That is the point. So, objective is what? In 5 years, you have to reduce this amount of what? Particulate matter 10 and particulate matter 2.5. Now, this particulate matters are important. Why? Because whatever we are witnessing in Delhi is just outcome of this. And this again, crop, even Supreme Court said that don't only blame the farmers. Even there are other reasons also, like other reasons like the combustion. Okay, the emissions that are done by the vehicles and all those things. So if you have to reduce this by 20-30%, what government has done? Government has initiative that BS6 should be implemented. Okay, BS6 is there, promoting electric vehicles. So these all will help indirectly to deal or to satisfy these programs. So even if the electric vehicles are significantly increased, then particulate matter concentration will be reduced, because this is the smog mostly which is coming from the vehicles and all those things. So that is there. So that is the very important program. Remember that, National Clean Air Program. Okay, it is 5-year action plan with rough objective of 20-30% decrease in PM10 and PM2.5 by 2024. Then we have Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission. Solar energy is the clean energy. Okay, clean energy. Why? Because we know it is the energy converted by using the photovoltaic effect and all those things. So over here there is no combustion of the carbon, or carbon is not involved in the process of getting the energy. So if carbon is not involved, so obviously it is a clean source of energy, we can say. And so it was established in 2009 with a primary goal of reaching grid parity by 2022 and coal-based thermal power parity by 2030. So that means you have to create a sufficient amount of solar energy so you can get rid of thermal powers and all those things, because thermal power stations and all those things, again, they are responsible for what? They are responsible for emissions. Okay, at the same time, environmental or land degradation is also there. So to deal with all those things, it's very significant mission, the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission. And then we have National Action Plan on Climate Change, which is again very significant. Now its aim is to raise public awareness about climate change and the activities that may be taken to combat it. Fine. So it is simple. What is it? To deal, now just the name goes, obviously the objective will be to deal with or raise public awareness about the climate change and activities that may be taken to combat it. Now see, understand, dealing with climate change is not only the responsibilities of the government, but it has the responsibilities of individual also. Like even if we do not use a plastic bag, individual, still it will make a difference, because individuals also are capable of making the difference. And it is when individuals will become serious about the climate change and its impact, the governments will have to become serious about that. So that one point you always need to remember. So that may be taken to combat it among members of the public, environmental agencies, scientists, industry and the communities. So these are some of the significant initiatives by the government of India to fight the climate change. Now to summarize what we have learned. We have learned the highlights of the Adaptation Gap Report 2020. Then we studied the Adaptation Gap Report 2020 in use. And then we studied the global challenges like of temperatures and rising temperatures and all. And then we studied some of the Indian initiatives to fight the climate change. So with that, I hope you have understood whatever we have discussed about the Adaptation Gap Report 2020 released by the United Nations Environment Programme. That's it for this session. See you in another one. Thank you.